There's a specific kind of silence that only exists inside government buildings, not the silence of a library where people are choosing to be quiet, not the silence of a church where the quiet feels sacred, intentional, like the walls themselves are listening. This silence is different. It's the silence of fluorescent lights humming over beige carpet, of printers warming up, of someone 3 cubicles away clicking a pen without realizing they're doing it, over and over, click, click, click. That was the silence Tariq Osman walked into at 8:47 on a Tuesday morning in early November. He hadn't slept. You could tell not because he looked disheveled, because he didn't. He was wearing the same kind of clothes he always wore to the office: dark trousers, a collared shirt, neat shoes. The kind of clothes that say, "I'm holding it together even when you're not." But his eyes had that particular heaviness to them, the kind that doesn't come from one bad night. The kind that accumulates over days, like sediment. He was carrying a folder, brown, standard issue. The kind every civil servant in this building had handled 1,000 times. Inside it, 3 documents, a death certificate, a letter from a funeral home, and a form HR Leave 07s, B, which he'd printed the night before, sitting at his kitchen table at 2 in the morning, the kettle going cold beside him because he kept forgetting to pour it. Let me tell you something about this building first, because the building matters. The Whitehall Annex, they call it. Not the famous part, not the part tourists photograph, not the grand facades that show up in documentaries about British governance and make everything feel important and old and weighty. This is the other part, the part around the side, accessed through a door with a keypad and a small laminated sign that says Staff Empry, and underneath it, someone has taped a handwritten note that says please ensure door closes fully. And the tape is starting to peel at the corners, and nobody has fixed it in months. Inside grey corridors, a lift that takes 45 seconds to arrive on a good day. An open-plan floor filled with identical desks, each one carrying the personality of the person who sits there in small, quiet ways, a succulent near the monitor here, a Liverpool FC mug there, a printed photograph of someone's kids tucked beside the keyboard. The carpet is the color of old mustard. The walls are painted the color of nothing in particular. Everything in the building whispers process, procedure, one thing at a time. Tariq had worked there for 11 years. He knew every corner of it. He knew which microwave door stuck. He knew that the 3rd stall in the men's bathroom had a lock that was unreliable, and you had to lift the door slightly while you turned it. He knew that if you needed Margaret in facilities to actually do something, you had to email her and then follow up the email with a visit in person. Because she had a system, a physical tray on her desk, and digital requests had a way of falling through the cracks of it. 11 years. Which means he also knew the leave policy. He knew it very well. His mother had died 4 days ago, a Saturday. Late afternoon, he'd been in the kitchen making rice. She liked to eat early now, had for years when his phone rang. It was the ward nurse. Her voice was gentle in the practiced way that nurses on those particular wards learn to make their voices gentle. She told him what had happened. She said the words carefully, like she was placing them down rather than dropping them. She said his mother had been peaceful. She said they'd done everything they could. Tariq had stood in the kitchen with the phone against his ear and the rice still bubbling on the hob and the afternoon light going orange through the window. He'd said, "I'll be there shortly." He'd turned off the hob. He'd put his coat on and he'd driven to the hospital. He didn't cry in the car. He cried in the car park, 3 minutes, face in his hands, shoulders shaking. And then he stopped, got out and walked in. That was Tariq. That was how he moved through the world. His mother's name was Suhaila. She was 68. She had been ill for 2 years, properly ill. The kind where you know the ending even if nobody says it out loud, where every visit becomes quietly charged with the weight of this might be the last time. She had come to England from Karachi in 1987 with a suitcase and a husband and a stubbornness about her that she passed on to Tariq almost genetically. She made the best dal he'd ever eaten. She thought British weather was a personal insult directed at her specifically. She called him every Sunday without fail, even in the last months when the conversation was mostly her drifting in and out, and he'd sit on the phone just listening to her breathe because the sound of it still felt like home. She was gone now, and Tariq had a form to submit. The HR department was on the second floor. He took the stairs. The lift would have meant standing still, and standing still felt dangerous right now, like his thoughts might catch up to him if he gave them the opportunity. The HR department occupied a glass-fronted corner of the second floor. You could see in through the glass. 2 desks, a printer, a small round table with chairs arranged around it for what the department called sensitive conversations, which was HR language for anything that required a box of tissues to be positioned nearby. On the door, a printed sign, Home and Resources, and below that, a smaller sign, Please knock and wait. He knocked. Come in. The voice belonged to a woman named Patricia Hensley, mid-50s, reading glasses pushed up onto her forehead, a cardigan the color of dusty rose. Patricia had been in HR for Tariq wasn't sure exactly, but long enough that she'd processed his probation paperwork when he'd first joined, which made it at least 11 years. She had a warmth to her that expressed itself mostly in the way she made tea without being asked. The tea was never quite hot enough, but you appreciated the gesture. She looked up from her screen when he came in, looked at the folder in his hand, and for just a moment, barely a second, something passed across her face. Recognition. Sorrow. The look of someone who has processed enough of these to know one when it walks through the door. Tariq, she said, come and sit down. He sat. He placed the folder on the desk between them. He said, my mother passed away on Saturday. I need to apply for bereavement leave. Patricia nodded. Her hand moved toward the folder but didn't quite touch it yet. I'm so sorry, she said, and she meant it, you could tell. I'm truly sorry for your loss. Thank you, he said. The way he said it, quiet, measured, like a door carefully closing, was the kind of response that told you exactly how much he was holding. Patricia opened the folder. She looked at the death certificate. She nodded. She picked up the letter from the funeral home. She read it. She set it down. Then she picked up the form, HR leave, 7th B, and she looked at it, and then she looked at him, and he saw her expression shift slightly, just slightly. This is the right form, she said, but she paused, set it flat on the desk. Tariq, did you fill in section C? He looked, section C, relationship to deceased, for purposes of entitlement assessment. He had. He'd written, mother. Yes, he said. I did. Right. She put the form down. She took her glasses off her forehead and put them on. The thing is, and I want to be upfront with you about this, our bereavement policy currently provides 3 days for immediate family, which is defined in the policy document as spouse, child, or parent living in the same household. She said it the way people say difficult things when they've had to say them before, carefully, but without the hesitation that might suggest there's any wiggle room in the words themselves. Your mother, did she live with you? The question landed. Tariq looked at Patricia, he said. No, she lived in Wembley. I live in Stockwell. Patricia nodded, slowly, the kind of nod that isn't agreement, just acknowledgement. Then, under the current policy, she would be classified as a non-resident parent, which falls under the extended family category. She paused. Which is 1 day. The fluorescent light above them hummed. Somewhere outside the glass partition, a printer started up. Tariq said 1 day. I know, Patricia said quickly. I know how that sounds. I want you to know I'm not. She stopped. Started again. The policy is due for review in February. There's been a lot of internal discussion about these definitions, but right now, as it stands, she died on Saturday. Tariq said, not loudly, not with anger exactly, or if there was anger in it, it was the compressed kind. The kind that lives in the very back of the throat. The funeral is on Friday, which is 4 days from now. I have to arrange everything. There's no one else? She didn't. He stopped himself, swallowed. There's no one else. Patricia looked at him. She looked at the form, she said, I understand, I do. There are options. What options? You can apply for 5 days of discretionary leave. It requires your line manager's approval. And you'd need to submit Form HR Leave 12, another form, and it goes to the Deputy Director for sign-off. And normally the turnaround is, how long? Patricia hesitated. The standard processing window is 5 to 7 working days. 5 to 7 working days. The funeral was in 4. He didn't raise his voice. I want to be clear about that because it matters. It says something about who Tariq Osman is, as a person, that he didn't raise his voice. He sat in that chair, across from Patricia Hensley, with his mother's death certificate in a brown folder on the desk between them, and he held himself very still. "So what you're telling me," he said, "is that I need approval to grieve." Patricia looked like she wanted to say something that would make this better. She looked like she'd spent years in this job accumulating the language to smooth over moments, exactly like this one. And in this moment, all of it felt insufficient, and she knew it. "I'm telling you what the policy says," she said quietly. "I'm not telling you I agree with it. Who do I talk to?" Tariq asked. "Your line manager is Neil. He'd need to. Neil is in Edinburgh until Thursday. There's an acting manager, Diane. Diane has been here 6 weeks. The humming of the light, the printer finishing its job somewhere outside." Tariq stood up. He picked up his folder. He said, "Thank you, Patricia," she said, Tariq. But he was already turning toward the door. And whatever she was going to say, the rest of it, the part that might have been something human rather than something procedural, it stayed with her in that glass-fronted room with the round table and the box of tissues, while he walked back out into the mustard-colored corridor and stood there for a moment, absolutely still, with his hand on the wall, just breathing. Just breathing? There's a particular cruelty in the way ordinary life refuses to stop. You'd think it might? You'd think the world might register the weight of what's happened and pause, just briefly, out of something like respect. But it doesn't. The buses still run, the coffee machine in the break room still makes that gurgling, spluttering sound at 9:10 every morning. The sky over Whitehall is still grey and persistent, in the way November skies over London always are, pressing down on the city like a thumb on a bruise. Life continues. It has somewhere to be, and so apparently did Tariq. He was at his desk by 9:15. His computer was open. His inbox had 42 unread emails, 3 of which were flagged urgent, 2 of which he could tell from the subject lines alone were not actually urgent, but had been flagged urgent by someone who flagged everything urgent because they had confused urgency with importance. He looked at the screen. He moved his mouse. The screensaver disappeared. He didn't read any of them. For a few minutes, maybe 5, maybe 10. Time does strange things when you're inside it. He just sat there, looking at the screen, feeling the chair beneath him, the hum of the building around him. The soft collective sound of 40 people doing their work, which from the outside sounds like nothing at all, just a kind of ambient busyness. His colleague, Marcus, whose desk was directly opposite, leaned around his monitor. Marcus was 31, Nigerian British, with a very specific gift for reading a room and then very deliberately choosing how to respond to it. "You all right?" he asked. Not, "I heard about your mum," though he had. Tariq had sent a brief email to the team on Sunday. Not, "How are you holding up?" because Marcus knew that question usually just makes people perform okayness rather than express anything real. Just, "You all right?" "No," said Tariq. "Right," said Marcus. He stood up. "Tea. Yeah." That was the whole conversation, and somehow it was exactly right. The problem with the leave situation did not go away while Tariq sat at his desk and Marcus made tea. The problem had a shape to it now. He kept turning it over in his mind the way you might turn over a stone. Not because you expect to find anything pleasant underneath, but because you can't quite make yourself put it down. One day, he'd done the arithmetic before he'd even left the HR office. The funeral was on Friday. He'd need Thursday to collect his mother's things from the ward. There were things, personal things, that needed to be collected, and he couldn't have a stranger do it. He'd need to receive the imam who was coming Thursday evening to do the recitation. He'd need to be at the mosque at Fajr on Friday, before the sun was properly up, because that was what his mother would have wanted, would have expected, would have specified if she'd had the presence of mind to specify it. And then the janazah, and then the burial. And then the house, his mother's house, which needed people in it, because the tradition held that you didn't leave the bereaved alone in the first days, and he was the bereaved and the house would need to be open. All of that was the next 4 days. He had one. He could take his annual leave, of course. He had 12 days remaining. He could just take them. Submit the request through the standard portal. which he'd done dozens of times, for holidays, for appointments, for the occasional mental health day that he'd request under personal reasons because the form didn't offer a better option. He could do that. He'd calculated this, also, in the back of his mind. It was technically possible. But it felt like something. He wasn't quite sure what to call it. Wrong felt melodramatic, unfair felt more accurate, but also perhaps too large. It felt like the institution was asking him to spend his own resource, his own accumulated time, his own banked absence, to cover for a gap in the policy's humanity. It felt like being told, your grief is real, but it's yours to fund. Marcus came back with 2 mugs. He set one in front of Tariq. He sat down. He didn't say anything immediately, just wrapped his hands around his own mug and looked at the middle distance the way people do when they're giving someone space to speak if they want to. Tariq said, "Did you know that non-resident parents fall under the extended family category?" Marcus looked at him. "What bereavement policy? If your parent doesn't live with you, they're classified as extended family, which is 1 day." Marcus was quiet for a moment, then he said, "That's mad. I know. Your mum just died. I know." And there, "Marcus? Yeah? Don't." Tariq stopped. He wrapped his own hands around the mug. "Don't be angry about it right now. I can't." He stopped again, swallowed something. "I need to think, not feel. Right now I need to think." Marcus looked at him for a moment, nodded. "Right," he said. "Okay, so, options. Annual leave. That's the obvious one. I know. I resent it. Yeah." Marcus considered, what about discretionary? 5 to 7 working days for approval. Funerals in 4. What if your line manager, Edinburgh acting manager? 6 weeks in, Marcus was quiet. Then he said, "Is there anyone above Patricia who could?" That would be the deputy director. And Tariq looked at him. "Clive Merton." A pause. "Right," said Marcus. He said it the way you say, right when the name of a person is itself a complication. "Let me tell you about Clive Merton, because you need to understand who Tariq would have to go to." Clive Merton had been Deputy Director of Operations for 6 years. He was in his early 60s, which meant he'd come up through the civil service at a time when the civil service had a different relationship with itself, more formal, more vertical, more invested in the idea that process was not merely a tool but a value. He wasn't cruel. That's important. He wasn't the kind of person who took pleasure in rigidity or who used rules as a weapon. He was simply a man who believed, genuinely believed, that the systems existed for good reasons and that departing from them, even for good reasons, created precedent, and precedent created chaos. And chaos was the enemy of effective governance. He wore the same style of suit every day, just in different colors. He had a firm handshake and the kind of eye contact that was just slightly too sustained to be comfortable. His office was on the 4th floor. It had a view of the courtyard. Tariq had spoken to him perhaps 15 times in 11 years, mostly in group settings, twice in corridors, once memorably, in a lift where the 45-second wait had felt considerably longer. He was not the kind of man you went to with something personal, but there he was, at the top of the tree that Tariq needed to climb. At 11 o'clock, Tariq went back upstairs, not to HR this time, to the 4th floor. The carpet up here was the same mustard color but slightly less worn. Fewer people came this far up, so it had aged more gracefully, like a part of the building that had been preserved under glass. The offices along this corridor had actual doors, not just open plan partitions. Names on the doors, real names on real plaques. Clive Merton, Deputy Director of Operations. Tariq stood outside the door for a moment. He could hear faintly through the wood the sound of a keyboard. Someone on the phone, voice too low to make out the words. The building's persistent hum. He knocked. 1 moment. He waited. He counted 17 seconds, not on purpose. It was just what his mind did. "Yes, come in." Clive Merton was sitting behind a desk that was impressively tidy. Not obsessively so. There were papers on it, a coffee cup, a laptop open to one side, but tidy in the way of someone who processes things and puts them away rather than letting them accumulate. He looked up when Tariq came in. He had the particular expression of someone in the middle of several things who is allocating a portion of their attention to this new thing while the others continue in the background. "Tariq," he said. It came out as a slight question, not which Tariq. They both knew that, but something more like Tariq coming to my office is unusual. What has occasioned it? Sorry to interrupt, Tariq said. He wasn't sorry, but it was the grammar of the situation. Do you have a few minutes? Merton glanced at his screen. A few. Sit down. Tariq sat. He explained calmly and clearly, in the way he'd been composing in his head since he left HR. His mother, the death, the funeral, the policy classification, the one-day entitlement, the discretionary leave process with its 5 to 7 day window, the acting manager who'd been here 6 weeks, the line manager in Edinburgh. He laid it all out, just the facts. He didn't editorialize. He was aware, somewhere in the back of his mind, that editorializing would not help him here, that Merton responded to coherence, not to feeling. When he finished, there was a silence. Merton had listened with his hands clasped on the desk in front of him. He hadn't interrupted. He nodded, once slowly, in the way of a man assembling a response. "I'm sorry about your mother," he said. "Genuinely. Thank you. The policy situation you're describing is..." He paused. "I'm aware it creates difficulties in cases like yours. It's a known limitation. It's on the list for the February review. The funeral is on Friday," Tariq said. "I know." Merton unclasped his hands, picked up his pen, set it down again. The discretionary process exists precisely for situations the standard entitlements don't cover. The challenge is the timeline. Can you approve it directly, given the circumstances? A pause that lasted perhaps 3 seconds. Technically, the approval sits with the deputy director. Yes, the form needs to go through Patricia's office first with appropriate. I have the form. I have all the documentation. Merton looked at him. Something moved behind his eyes, not discomfort exactly, more like the look of a man standing at the edge of something and calculating the distance to the other side. The standard procedure, I know what the standard procedure is, Tariq said. Still quiet, still measured. I'm asking if, in this specific case, given that the standard procedure will run longer than the event it's meant to accommodate, you're able to use your discretion, which the policy gives you. Another pause. The keyboard sound from wherever it had been coming from had stopped. Merton picked up his pen again. He said, "Leave the form with Patricia. Tell her I've spoken to you. I'll have a look this afternoon." This afternoon? Not yes, not I'll approve it. Not of course. Take what you need. But I'll have a look. It was something. It was not nothing. Tariq stood up, he said. Thank you. He meant it. And also he resented having to mean it. He went back to his desk. He opened his inbox. He read the first email, one of the actually urgent ones, a data discrepancy in a quarterly return that needed resolving by end of day. He read it twice. He understood it. He began drafting a response. This is the part that nobody tells you about. Not the forms, not the policy language, not the meetings in glass-fronted offices. Those are the part you talk about afterward, the part that becomes the story. But the part nobody tells you about is this, the in-between, the sitting at your desk, the continuing, the inbox that doesn't know or care what's happened. The quarterly return that needs resolving by end of day regardless. The way the building keeps asking things of you while you're quietly falling apart inside your tidy, collared shirt. His phone buzzed. A message from his cousin in Birmingham, Tariq Bai. Who's doing the gussle? Let me know, I can arrange. He put the phone face down on the desk, finished his email, sent it, picked the phone back up, replied to his cousin. The coffee machine gurgled at the end of the corridor. Someone laughed at something 2 rows over. The fluorescent light hummed. And Tariq Osman sat at his desk in the Whitehall Annex on a grey November Tuesday, doing his job, managing his grief in the only windows it was offered, and waiting to find out whether the deputy director would look at a form this afternoon. The email came at 4:52 in the afternoon. That detail, 4:52, matters more than it should, probably. But it does matter because it was 8 minutes before the end of the working day, which is a time when people in offices stop beginning things and start finishing them. It was the time of day when the building's collective energy shifts almost imperceptibly toward leaving, toward coats on the backs of chairs being shrugged on, toward monitors going dark, toward the mild, daily relief of departure. It was the time of day when receiving an email means something slightly different than receiving one at, say, 2 in the afternoon. At 4:52, an email says, "I held this until nearly the end." From Clive Merton to Tariq Osman CC, Patricia Hensley. Subject, RE, discretionary leave request, HR leave, 12 Tariq. I've reviewed your request and supporting documentation, and I'm approving 5 days of discretionary leave effective immediately to cover Thursday through the following Wednesday. Please take whatever time you need for the arrangements and for yourself. Patricia will update your records. I'm sorry for your loss. That was it. That was the whole email. Tariq read it once, then he read it again. Then he put his phone down on the desk and sat there for a moment looking at nothing, and Marcus looked over and took one look at his face and said, "Good or bad?" "Good," said Tariq. "He approved it, right?" Marcus exhaled. "Good, right, good." Tariq nodded. He started closing tabs on his computer. The quarterly return, resolved and sent. 2 other items that could wait. His calendar cleared of Thursday and Friday meetings that he'd have to reschedule. And his hands were steady, his movements were deliberate, and somewhere behind all of it was an emotion he still didn't have the space to fully reach. Something between relief and exhaustion. Something that felt like finally being allowed to put something down that you'd been carrying all day. He shut the laptop, put his coat on, picked up the brown folder. He stopped at Marcus's desk on the way out. "Thanks for the tea," he said. "Anytime," said Marcus. He didn't say "take care" or "I'm sorry," or any of the other phrases that are correct and kind and true, but feel somehow beside the point of what you're actually trying to express. He just looked at Tariq for a moment, and what passed between them in that look, years of adjacent desks, of shared lunches and difficult clients, and the particular intimacy of spending 5 days a week in the same square footage of someone's life, said everything the words didn't. Tariq walked out. The tube was busy in the way November rush hour tubes are always busy. That particular density of bodies in wool coats, the smell of damp fabric and coffee dregs, and the recycled breath of the city. He stood and held the overhead rail and watched the darkness of the tunnel and thought about his mother. Not in an organized way, not in the way you might think about a person when you're composing a eulogy, gathering the important things, the representative things, in the chaotic, non-linear way that grief actually works, images appearing and disappearing without logic or chronology. Her hands, specifically, he kept coming back to her hands, the way they looked when she cooked, moving through steam. The way they looked when she was sitting in the hospital chair in those last weeks, small and still in her lap, like something that had finished its work. The way one of them had felt when he'd held it on one of the last visits, warm still, the bones close to the surface. He thought about the form on the desk that morning, about Patricia's face when she'd explained the policy, about the 3 seconds of silence in Clive Merton's office, about the 8 minutes before end of day. And he thought something that he wouldn't have been able to articulate fully then, but that he turned over in his mind for a long time afterward. In the days that followed, the busy, necessary, utterly exhausting days of arranging and attending and receiving and being present in all the ways that loss requires of the people left behind. The thing he thought was this, that the institution had not failed him, not entirely. It had stumbled over its own language, its own definitions, the small but significant gap between what a policy means to write and what it means to live inside. The gap between parent living in the same household as a classification and the woman who raised you, who called every Sunday, who made you the person who stands calmly in offices holding things together, even when you're falling apart as a human reality. That gap was real. That gap had cost him something, not the leave, in the end, because Clive Merton had signed it, but the morning, the brown folder, the conversation with Patricia, the walk back down the corridor with his hand on the wall, just breathing. That cost was real. And the institution had not made him pay it deliberately. It had simply not thought carefully enough about the shape of grief, which is irregular, which doesn't map neatly onto categories, which doesn't care about the difference between Wembley and Stockwell. But Merton had looked at the form that afternoon. He'd taken 8 minutes at the end of his day to write 4 sentences that said, "Take what you need." That was something that still meant something. He got off at Stockwell. The night air was cold. Properly cold now. Winter finally meaning it after weeks of grey half-heartedness. His breath made a cloud when he exhaled. The street was lit orange under the lamps, and the chicken shop on the corner had its door open and the smell of it came out warm and ordinary into the night air. He called his cousin as he walked, made the arrangements about the ghusl, called the funeral home about the Friday timing, called the imam to confirm Thursday evening. Made a list in his head of things the house would need: food, mostly because people would come and people would need to eat. And that was how it worked. That was the tradition, the pragmatic mercy of it. Grief fed, grief housed, grief given something to do with its hands. When he reached his flat, he sat down on the stairs just inside the door, still in his coat. Didn't take his shoes off yet, just sat. The way you sometimes sit when you've been moving all day and your body finally finds a surface it trusts. He thought about the last time he'd been to his mother's house. 10 days ago, it would have been. She'd been having a better morning. Those still happened. Intermittent, but real. She'd asked him about work, which she always did, and he'd told her about the quarterly return discrepancy. She'd never fully understood what he did, but she'd always listened with the same focused attention, as if it mattered, because to her, it mattered because it was his. She'd asked if he was eating properly. He'd said yes. She'd looked at him in the way she always did when he said yes to that question. The look that said, "I know, but I'm asking anyway." He should have stayed longer. He always thought that after visits, he should have stayed longer. He always had to be somewhere, or thought he did, a thing to finish, a call to make, the general gravitational pull of the life he'd built in Stockwell. 7 miles away from the life that had built him, and she never said stay longer. She was not that kind of mother, the pressuring kind, the guilt-deploying kind. She simply received however much time he brought and was grateful for it, and never made him feel the subtraction of what he hadn't. He should have stayed longer. He sat on the stairs. He cried, not the controlled 3 minutes in the hospital car park, not the compressed, back-of-the-throat thing he'd been managing all day. Properly, with noise. With his face in his hands and his shoulders going, and the brown folder on the step beside him. He cried the way you cry, when there's nobody to perform okayness for, when the building stops asking things of you, when the day finally consents to be over. He cried until he didn't anymore. Then he got up, took off his coat, made tea properly, this time hot. The way his mother had always insisted tea should be made, in an actual pot, not a bag in a mug. He sat at his kitchen table and drank it, called his cousin again about something he'd forgotten. Started a list on his phone, things to do Thursday, things to collect from the ward, food to buy, flowers, she'd have wanted white. His phone showed the time, 7:34. He thought about the form, about the morning, about what it costs to have to ask. He thought about something his mother used to say, not often, but it came back to him now, came back with her voice in it, which was still so present, so much itself, that it almost seemed impossible it was only memory. She used to say, "Beta, the world is full of walls. You don't fight every wall, you find the door." He'd found the door. Today, he'd found it. But he thought about all the people who hadn't known there was one. All the people who'd taken the one day without asking, because they didn't know they could ask, because the form had said one day, and they'd believed the form. All the people who'd sat in the car park and composed themselves and gone back into the building when what they needed was to be home, to be at the mosque, to be beside the body of the person they'd lost, to be anywhere but in the fluorescent hum of a place that classified their grief as extended. He thought about that for a long time. The funeral was on Friday. It was grey and cold, and the sky pressed down in the particular way November skies press down. But the mosque was warm and full. More people than he'd expected. People from the community he didn't know well. People his mother had known through the years. Neighbors, the woman from the Pakistani grocery on her street, who'd been giving her free onions for a decade and had apparently never mentioned it. The imam spoke well. The words were old, older than the building around them, older than the institution Tariq worked in, older than any policy document that had ever tried to define what a person was to another person. They were words that had been said over loss for centuries, in every kind of grief, by every kind of bereaved, and there was something in that continuity that helped. Something in the knowledge that this moment, this specific weight, was one that had been held before and survived. Tariq stood beside the grave. The ground was soft from recent rain. Someone handed him a small amount of earth, and he bent forward and released it, and listened to the sound of it meeting what was below. He thought she called every Sunday. He thought she made the best dal. He thought she thought British weather was a personal insult. He thought I should have stayed longer. He thought all of these things at once, in the way grief thinks, not in sequence but in a kind of simultaneous chord, all the notes sounding together, some of them harmonious and some of them not. He returned to work the following Wednesday. He came in early before most people arrived, which meant the building was quiet in a different way than usual. The fluorescent lights were on, but the desks were mostly empty. The mustard carpet looked the same. The printer in the corner was the same printer. The smell of the place, that specific mixture of carpet cleaner and old coffee and recycled air, was exactly as it had always been. He sat down at his desk, opened his laptop, opened his inbox. At the bottom of the unread emails, right at the bottom, because he'd last checked on Tuesday of the previous week, was one from Patricia Hensley, sent Wednesday morning, the day after he'd left. Subject policy review. Your input requested. Dear Tariq, I hope you don't mind me reaching out at this difficult time. Following your visit and a subsequent conversation with the Deputy Director, it's been agreed to accelerate the bereavement policy review. As part of this, we're gathering input from staff who have navigated the current policy. If you'd be willing at any point to share your experience even briefly, it would be genuinely valuable. There's no pressure at all and no timeline. I just wanted you to know the conversation is happening. He read it twice. He looked at the time it had been sent. 8:51 a.m. before most people arrived. He thought about Patricia, sitting at her desk on Wednesday morning in her dusty rose cardigan, composing this email. The specific act of it, the care in the phrasing, the no pressure at all, no timeline, the way it managed to say your suffering was useful without making your suffering feel like it had only ever been a tool, he thought. She'd thought about how to write this. She'd probably rewritten it. She'd sent it while she was still most likely rattled by the conversation on Tuesday. By the moment when Tariq had said, so what you're telling me is I need approval to grieve, and she'd had nothing to offer but the form and her own regret, he replied. 3 sentences. Patricia, thank you for this. Yes, I'd be willing to share my experience when the time is right. I hope the review changes something for the next person. He sent it. He opened the quarterly return. There was a follow-up needed. A response from a team in Cardiff that had come in while he was gone. He read it. He understood it. He began to draft a response. The printer in the corner warmed up. 2 colleagues arrived, shedding coats. Marcus appeared and looked over the top of his monitor and gave the particular nod that was his version of welcome back. Glad you're here. The building hummed. Life continued. It had somewhere to be. But something had shifted. Somewhere in the machinery of the place. Something small and bureaucratic, and probably invisible to most people. A form in a tray, a conversation in a 4th floor office, an email sent at 8:51 on a Wednesday, and maybe it would matter when the next person came in carrying their folder, their death certificate, their grief held carefully in front of them, like something breakable. Maybe the next person would get more than one day. That was what Tariq had to believe. That was the door his mother had always told him to find. The fluorescent light hummed. Outside, London went on being London grey, busy, indifferent. And inside, somewhere in the mustard-carpeted corridors of a building that was never designed to hold human feeling, a man who had just buried his mother sat down at his desk and did his job. Because that is what it sometimes costs, to live inside the structures that were built before they knew to ask what you needed. And that is what it sometimes means, to quietly insist, not with anger, not with noise, that they learn.